The successful completion of the Apollo 11 mission was one of the most important moments in human history. The United States and NASA had successfully landed the first humans on the moon, and the celestial object that baffled early scientists, spawned religions, and inspired countless artworks had finally been explored. However, the pathway to this important moment in history was paved in tragedy. The Apollo program birthed one of the greatest moments in aeronautics, but also one of the most deadly. Designated AS-204 and later dubbed Apollo 1, this mission was the first manned low orbital flight test, but a launch rehearsal test failed and command pilot Gus Grissom, senior pilot Ed White, and pilot Roger B. Chaffee all lost their lives in the accident. What was the history behind the Apollo program? And who were the three brave crew members that lost their lives? And what went wrong with the Apollo 1? The first crew member of Apollo 1 was command pilot Grissom. He was born Virgil Ivan Grissom on April 3rd of 1926. He got his nickname in grade school when his friend misread his last name, and he went by Gus for the rest of his life. He was born in a small town in Indiana, and Gus started building model airplanes at a young age with dreams of taking to the skies. He was a member of the Church of Christ, a Boy Scout, and he worked a variety of small jobs before starting high school in 1940. There, Gus was outstanding at math, but his other subjects were middle of the road. Gus's adventurous and competitive spirit led him to basketball tryouts where he was discouraged from continuing since he wasn't tall enough. However, his height wouldn't stop him from achieving his dreams. During his high school years, he would spend time at the airfield, and a local lawman would sometimes take him on flights in his personal plane. During these flights, Gus learned the basics of piloting. Gus met his future wife Betty Moore at high school, and he would drive to see her even though gasoline was rationed because of World War II. The pair got married on July 6 of 1945, and they had 2 sons. Both boys followed in their father's footsteps to graduate from Purdue University with degrees that support aviation. A year before Grissom got married, he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces as an aviation cadet, and he re-enlisted for the Korean War after graduating from Purdue. There he flew over 100 combat missions, and he wanted to fly even more, but his request was denied and he was assigned to the technology wing of a base in Ohio. There, he would gain the rank of captain and serve as a test pilot. A few years later in 1959, Grissom received a top-secret classified message instructing him to report to the U.S. Capitol wearing civilian clothes, and he was forbidden to talk about this interesting change of pace. Only 508 candidates were considered for the job, and only 1/5 of those were actually selected to be test pilots for Project Mercury, the U.S. space program's first attempt to send a human safely into space and back home again. The competition was the most extreme Grissom had faced yet, and he was almost disqualified because of hay fever. But doctors found it was an allergy to ragweed, and since ragweed isn't in space, he was cleared to continue training. In April of that same year, Grissom selected to be one of the 7 astronauts for Project Mercury. A few years later in 1961, he would pilot the second flight for the project. He would later work on Project Gemini to become the first NASA astronaut to fly to space twice. This long history of experience granted him his role as commander of Apollo 1. The second member of the Apollo 1 test was senior pilot Ed White. Born Edward White II on November 14th of 1930 in San Antonio, Texas, his father would later become a Major General of the U.S. Air Force, and his family included his mother Mary White, his younger brother James, and an older sister Jeanne. Like Gus, Ed was interested in flight at a young age, and he was also a member of the Boy Scouts of America. Unlike Gus, who grew up in a small town, Ed moved around the country because of his dad's military job, but being the son of a high-ranking official helped him get ahead of his studies. He ended up getting into West Point, met his future girlfriend Patricia Finnegan. Later, Ed almost competed in the 1952 U.S. Olympic team in the 400-meter hurdles race, but he tragically missed the cutoff by 0.4 seconds. White graduated from West Point as a second lieutenant in the Air Force and he went to Bartow Air Base in Florida to train as a pilot. From there, he continued his training in Texas and received his pilot wings in 1953. Afterward, he was assigned to the base in Arizona and married Patricia, and they had 2 children. From there, he flew the North American F-86 Sabre and the North American F-100 Super Sabre for 3.5 years while stationed in West Germany. While there, he read an article about astronauts and decided to get a degree in aeronautical engineering to improve his chances at being selected for a job as an astronaut. Ed wasn't finished tightening up his resume though. After getting his Master's of Science degree, he attended the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Base Force in California and graduated again in 1959. With this new skill, Ed did weapons development flight tests, and he flew planes used to train astronauts in weightless environments. He made some headlines by flying John Glenn, who would become the first American to orbit the Earth, and Ham the Astrochimp, the first humanoid to reach outer space. Afterward, Ed White became one of the 9 finalists chosen by NASA to become Astronaut Group 2 for the Gemini program, where he was a flight school control system specialist. He would pilot Gemini 4 and requested that NASA allow him to test a spacewalk. NASA agreed, and he became the first American to perform a spacewalk. Then, in March of 1966, he was selected for the Apollo program. The final crew member from the Apollo 1 disaster was Roger B. Chaffee. Chaffee was born February 15th of 1935 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, to parents Donald and Blanche. Chaffee also had an older sister. A few years after Roger was born, his dad got a job as Chief Army Ordnance Inspector, but before that, his dad was a stunt pilot, otherwise known as a barnstorming pilot, who worked in flying circuses. Like both of his fellow crewmen, Roger got interested in flight from a young age after his dad took him on a flight when he was 7 years old. Together, the Chaffee father and son duo built model planes while Roger joined the Boy Scouts. Chaffee graduated high school in the top 20% of his class in 1953 and got a Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps, or NROTC scholarship, which helped him enroll in Illinois Institute of Technology, where he continued to do well in school. He would later transfer to Purdue to attend the school's top-rated flight engineering program. In September of 1955, he met Martha Horn on a double-blind date, and the two would eventually marry on August 24th of 1957. The same year he met Martha, Roger began taking flying lessons, but he didn't have enough money to get his license. The NROTC sponsored additional flight training so he could become a naval pilot, and after he graduated from Purdue, he began training. He flew T-28s and T-34s at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. He would later be transferred to a different base in Florida, where he was tasked with repairing an A-3D twin-engine spy plane. Because of the sensitivity of missions these planes flew, they were almost always flown by high-ranking soldiers. But Chaffee's sharp mind helped him learn the plane so well during his repairs that he would become one of the youngest pilots to fly the A-3D. Chaffee would go on to fly 82 missions over Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he would fly over 2,000 hours in jet planes during his Navy career. In 1962, Roger applied for NASA's astronaut training program. He was accepted for training for the third-party group of NASA astronauts, and during this time he also got an offer from the Navy to finish his master's degree in reliability engineering. The NASA selection officials noticed Chaffee's lung capacity was smaller than other pilots, but he was able to control his breathing better. On October 18th of 1963, he was officially made a NASA astronaut. From there, he participated in Project Gemini, but he was assigned to work flight control in various roles from the ground instead of taking to the skies. But he was selected for the first crewed Apollo Saturn flight, dubbed AS-204, the mission that would end in disaster. What happened with the tragic Apollo 1 mission? The original mission was called AS-204, and it was the first man-crew test of the Command and Service Module, or CSM, as part of the NASA program to land humans on the moon. This was the mothership of the operation. It carried the crew and the lunar module, so it was one of the most complex parts of the mission. And it housed the whole crew, so it had to be perfectly done before it launched for real. On date, they stepped into the CSM and they wouldn't leave it alive. So how did this happen? How did we get to this fateful day? And what went so horribly wrong? In previous spaceflight programs, the command modules where the pilots sat were relatively small. The Apollo CSM was bigger and more complicated than any design NASA had ever tested. Engineer Joseph F. Shea was named the program office manager to oversee the design of CSM. With over 8,000 hours of collective flight experience and experience from engineering as well, all three crew members immediately saw design flaws. Here, they are pictured praying as a parody of their official portrait. Little did they know how dark this photo would become in hindsight. Shea approved the heavy use of nylon netting and Velcro to help pilots in a zero-gravity environment, but the crew saw the dangers this posed and they brought their concerns to Shea, and Shea ordered to have the materials removed. Then came the day it would all fall apart, January 27th of 1967. The crew came together to perform a plugs out test where they would see if the CSM would work properly with internal power after it had been separated from external cables. There was no fuel used for this test. There was no supercoolant. All the pyrotechnic systems were disabled. At 1 p.m., Grissom, Chaffee, and White entered the CSM in their spacesuits. They strapped into the chairs and began breathing from the system's oxygen intake. Grissom noticed the air smelled strange. He said it smelled like sour buttermilk. The team stalled the test for 20 minutes and took samples of the air. They couldn't find the cause of the smell, and they resumed the test an hour and 22 minutes later. The crew installed the hatch, which had multiple layers to allow the ship to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. The hatch was installed and sealed, and the air in the chamber was replaced with pure oxygen. The simulated countdown began, and the crew was passing time by going over their checklists again. Then, a strange transmission from inside the command module. Grissom shouted, "Hey, fire!" followed by, "Got a fire in the cockpit." Then, "We've got a bad fire. Let's get out. We're burning up." Then, the final 5 seconds were the crew members crying in pain. The hatch was never opened and all three pilots died.
Hey, how are we gonna get to the moon if we can't talk between three buildings? I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ. Again? And how are we gonna get to the moon if we can't talk between two or three buildings?
After the fire burnt out, NASA called for the Apollo 204 Accident Review Board to search the cause of the catastrophe. While the Congress sent 2 special committees to oversee the investigations, their findings showed the fire started with an electrical malfunction on AC Bus 2. But that was just the start of a nightmare chain reaction. The danger was the nylon material that surrounded the electrical components. The nylon fibers were lightweight and strong, but they initiated easily and spread the fire fast. The nylon was only part of the problem though. The cabin was designed to be highly pressurized to withstand the vacuum of space. This pressure made the fire easier to spread, but final piece that sealed the fate of the Apollo 1 crew was the atmosphere in the cabin. It was made of pure oxygen. Oxygen isn't flammable, but it has high energy that can oxidize other surfaces to fuel the fire. The NASA scientists accidentally created a highly combustible environment, but they weren't using rocket fuel for this test, so they thought it would be safe. Since they misunderstood the dangers of a possible electrical fire, they didn't prepare for a worst-case scenario where every safety measure failed. And that's exactly what happened. Once the crew signaled that a fire broke out, the team outside of the command module tried to open the door to let them out. The door was unlocked, but the specially designed plug door was sealed by internal pressure of the cabin, making it impossible to escape. After the accident, the mission was renamed Apollo 1, and manned test missions were suspended for almost 2 years while engineers went to work fixing the design flaws of the command module. These investigations into the Apollo 1 tragedy unearthed a scandal. NASA had to outsource some of the work for the Apollo project, and their main contractor was North American Aviation. Even though Joseph Shea had given orders to remove the flammable materials from the cabin, they were still present during the test. Shea hadn't actually contracted NAA himself, and he didn't check to see if it was carried out. Instead, he ordered his staff to tell the company. Senator Walter Mondale broke the news with a document showing that North American Aviation was butting heads with NASA. This internal document and the drama surrounding it would be called Phillips Report. But, as scary as it was, the investigation team found the details in the Phillips Report didn't impact the Apollo 1 failure. The Gus is remembered in the International Space Hall of Fame. He has 2 memorials at the former Launchpad 34 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, a 44-foot-tall monument in Mitchell, Indiana. He has a racehorse named after him called the Gus Grissom Stakes. Gus had an artificial island named after him in California, along with a museum, an airbase, and multiple schools named in his honor. The star Gamma Cassiopeia is sometimes called Navi, which is his middle name spelled backwards. And the governor of Indiana even declared a state holiday to celebrate the anniversary of his Project Mercury flight. Chaffee got a crater named after him on the far side of the moon, along with a planetarium at his hometown in Michigan, another hill on Mars, along with islands and parks in California. White has over 20 memorial schools, memorial sites, and space objects named after him. Their legacy lives on in film as well. All 3 of the astronauts were portrayed in the Astronaut Wives Club. Gus is portrayed in movies Air Cadet, Apollo 13, The Right Stuff, and other actors play him in TV shows like From the Earth to the Moon, That Thing You Do, and American Dreams. Gus is also referenced in multiple Star Trek releases and many other films. The backwards spelling of Gus's middle name might have been the inspiration for the blue aliens from James Cameron's Avatar. Even though Gus, Ed, and Roger never made it to the moon, history will remember and honor their sacrifice during the Apollo 1 tragedy.